Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy, and welcome to Peter Jackson Month. We're kicking off with his first feature film review today. Of course, we're talking about the 1987 science fiction comedy splatter film, Bad Taste. And this was a first time for us. Neither of us had actually seen this movie until now. You probably know what this is. I don't know why I'm being secretive and vague, but we've got
Yeah.
something big coming to the channel for the month of December. The entire month of December. You guys probably know what it is. And obviously, in the lead up to that very obviously epic thing, I thought it would be a good point of any really to go back and review Peter Jackson's previous films, because I haven't seen a single one of them. I've seen all of his films, Lord of the Rings onwards, but I've never gone back to his older ones. So I thought, it'd be a good through line and see where he started from, essentially. And that comes in the form of the 1987 film Bad Taste. And for anyone who hasn't seen Bad Taste, or is at least curious about it, the plot for this thing is the population of a small town disappears and is replaced by aliens that chase human flesh for their intergalactic fast food chain. We have our plot for a movie. But before we dive into this thing, over to Tate with the socials.
Yes, sure. So there's going to be loads of videos coming out soon, whether it's Peter Jackson month or whether it is other stuff. We're still going with the Bond stuff. We're still going with other film reviews and stuff like that is coming out. So be sure to follow us on our socials to keep track of what is coming out and when. So go onto Facebook, Cinema Savvy. Go onto Twitter, Cinema_Savvy. Go onto Letterboxd, Cinema Savvy again. And go into the link in the description to pick up a t-shirt from TeePublic.
Absolutely. Right. We are here to talk Bad Taste, as I mentioned. A cult film with kind of positive reviews across the board.
Yeah.
What do you think to cult films, Tate? Because I mean, this is as low budget as they come, right? I think this film was filmed by Peter Jackson across a 4-year time span. That's kind of often the case when you see these directors that start with a passion project with like a film that they make in their spare time. It's exactly that. It's made in their spare time. I know that when me and George did Christopher Nolan month, and we took on his first feature film the following, I think that was filmed over a 2-year period as well, at weekends, in between day jobs and everything. And that was exactly the same with Peter Jackson. It's interesting to note that obviously this was in production for 4 years, the same amount of time that the Lord of the Rings trilogy was in production for, pre-production, production itself, two wildly differing results.
Wow.
And I think that was what hit me the most with this. And I knew of Peter Jackson's humble beginnings. I'd seen clips and shots. The poster's very iconic, I think, with the alien, the look of the aliens themselves. It's as low budget as they come, so I was aware of the look of it, but being as big a fan of Lord of the Rings that I am, and what those films have not only done for me, but for cinema and just everything, what it's done for films afterwards, it was quite a juxtaposition going back to this first film. Very, very humble beginnings. I'm sure you'll agree on this one.
Yeah. It's so staggering. We were just talking about this before we actually went live. 10 years after this film was kind of made and kind of put out, he started production on Lord of the Rings. That's just insane to think about when you look at kind of this film in any context at all, and you go, oh yeah, 10 years time he's going to make like one of the greatest film trilogies of all time, and you're like, oh, okay, you sure? Are you sure you got the right person? Because obviously he has loads of films in between there which were kind of his audition pieces for it, but this is such a far cry from that. Maybe what you get from this film is the dedication to a 4-year long project, maybe being the only thing that you could kind of take from it that's kind of Peter Jackson-esque that you can move on through with. I think with cult films in general, you've got two very, very differing ends of the spectrum. You've got the very small, quiet, kind of low production value and kind of just make use of the fact that it is a low production and lean into that and go, look, it's low production, so we're not going to try anything fancy. You get films like the Blair Witch Project. You get films like even the Florida Project, like really, really kind of low production value kind of films. They're not trying anything special. They're not trying to do anything in particular. It's just filming, and there's no kind of added effects and stuff like that. Or you go the other end of the spectrum. You go with the kind of go big or go home kind of end of the spectrum, and this is where this film comes into. This is so B-movie. I think I told you on the chat, it's so B-movie. It's the most B-movie I've ever B-movied.
Yeah.
It is unreal. The everything down to it. It's almost a parody of itself. And I know that's nothing to do with the kind of, they weren't aiming for it to be a parody of anything or anything like that. But there were very different kind of production issues that came into effect that meant that the dialogue wasn't recorded at the same time as the actual filming. They had to do it in post-production. So the dialogue's slightly off. And you can tell that immediately. The acting is way over the top. The gore, Jesus, the splatter gore, whatever you call it, is grim.
There is no holds barred when it comes to the gore in this film. I think that's definitely the selling point, isn't it? And I do love Peter Jackson for that, and I'm sure we'll see this when we get to Dead Alive as well, or Brain Dead. It has 2 titles. That's going to be a strange intro to that review, I think, knowing on what to call it. But it's the lawnmower scene, right? That's the only scene that I've witnessed from that film, and just the carnage and the gore, and he loves it. He loves it. Like he's very self-indulgent in that way, I think, as indeed, many other directors are. I mean, look at Tarantino's, for God's sake. Like, they love it. And it's the escapism and it's the thrill. And even before he made this film, the other film that's credited on his filmography before this, unfortunately, I haven't seen this. I don't know if it's available to watch online or anywhere out there, if anyone's got a copy of it, or if it's able to be viewed anywhere. It was a 1976 film that Peter Jackson made when he was 15 with a bunch of his friends. It's called The Valley. It's a short film, and, watching the behind the scenes to The Lord of the Rings, it kind of goes into Peter Jackson's beginnings, and that even from a very young age, he loved props and models, and he'd make little miniatures of things, and he'd film little things with like a Super 8 camera and things like that. And I think actually The Valley was shot on Super 8 as well. It's very much based on the Ray Harryhausen stop motion animation creatures and everything, and he'd make his own creatures and props and models and film them. So there's definitely influences there, and especially when we get to King Kong, obviously it's got a 2006 CGI shine all over it, but the original King Kong was a film that was very near and dear to him, so he loved being a very hands-on filmmaker and very practical, which is very different from the Peter Jackson that we see now. You could say he's veered too closely to the CGI realm, especially when we get into the Hobbit films. Those are a review for a completely different time, and we might even dedicate a month to those films exclusively as well. But what I loved about watching this film is, and I'm not going to lie to you, it's not my favorite film of all time.
No.
Especially because, I've been spoiled with the films that are to follow by Peter Jackson, but I love the spirit in this film. And that, he had a vision. He clearly loved what he was doing. I mean, he was making this for 4 years, and it was just him and his mates having some fun with it. And I think there's like a real charm to this film. I can absolutely see why it's a cult film, even if it's not, I don't know when I'm next going to go back to this film, but I think in terms of like the practical effects and everything, considering this was done on I'd say like a relatively small budget, over the 4-year period, it was an initial cost of 25,000, what I'm assuming is New Zealand dollars. And then towards the end of the shoot, the New Zealand Film Commission invested 235,000 New Zealand dollars. And you mentioned about the sound equipment and everything. I think they probably provided him with much better equipment and to work with and to utilize than he initially started with. But like, what a project, what a passion project.
It's an interesting one, and it's everything down to kind of the design details. You can tell that this is kind of, there's been passion put into this. I mean, look at the alien design. I don't know if we can kind of get rid of ourselves here and just have that background or something like that, because it is just bring up the
I could just bring up the overlay. Give me a second here, guys. I mean, I can bring up the thumbnail. Let's
bring up the thumbnail. Go for it. Look at that. Look at that for an alien design. It's absolutely fantastic. And just kind of the characters that are introduced. It's very cheesy. It's very corny. It's very over the top. But you can tell everyone's having fun. Like, I'm sure there's many outtakes of people just bursting into laughter with some of the lines of dialogue and stuff like that. But it's a fun film, but at the same time, it's so bad it's good.
Yeah,
it's one of those. Yeah. It's with cult films, you do get that sometimes. Like I love The Room. I think The Room is a fantastic film, not because of the actual acting that goes into it, stuff like that, but because of its cult-like nature, because it is terrible acting, because it is kind of terrible effects and terrible dialogue and stuff like that goes into it. But with this film, it seems to all come together into what I can only say is the shoddiest of plot lines, which you're gonna get thrown in. And it took me till about, I think they started to explain the plot line about an hour in. You're like, what is going on? Like,
It's like we got to be wrapping this up soon. It's like a 92-minute
yeah,
movie. I will
yeah.
say the runtime a little
It dragged.
excessive.
It dragged.
That's Peter Jackson, though, especially when we get to King Kong. My God, if we're talking about excessive run
I'm
times,
gonna
that I
say,
mean,
can't wait to
look,
see the what's it called, extended edition director's cut of
oh
this
my
film.
God. Well, actually, I think there is. I think there's a
No
version that has
way.
like 6 minutes extra. I don't
God.
know if that's the version that I watched. I think it got banned actually in was it
Well,
Queensland in
I will, I will,
Australia?
I will
Yeah.
say this film nowadays is actually reasonably accessible. I don't know if it's completely legal that it's reasonably accessible, but it is available on YouTube. It's available on Vimeo. There are always websites that you can find and stuff like that, but I don't think it's easily accessible in any other way. Like, I don't
Mm.
expect it to be very easy to get like your hands on a DVD or even a VHS copy of this film. But it is accessible online if people do want to go and see it using your own channels and stuff like that to try and find it. And if you're a Peter Jackson fan and you're going to be watching this along with us, where we go through all the films, you do kind of have to watch it to kind of get that origin of, oh, this is where it all kind of started with his films and stuff like that. It'll be interesting to see how his films evolve on the way through as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you mentioned there about sort of its distribution and everything. I imagine this would be a real classic to hunt down on VHS. Like I could imagine like a big box copy with that poster, as we mentioned. Like I'm not going to bring the poster up again, but it is a great poster. Speaking of the aliens as well, I do think it's a unique design for the aliens, I think, and it works for the film. And I think Peter Jackson actually made the masks himself using
Yeah.
his mother's oven. So they're like probably foam masks that he had to like cook in the oven and everything. But it's a classic design. We've
So,
actually,
Chris,
oh yeah,
you can
sorry,
get a like new VHS version of it for £14 plus postage and packaging off eBay.
that's not bad. That's not bad. I thought he was going to say like £400 or something.
No.
I was like, I didn't mind the film, but I'm not going to pay that much for it.
Wonder if there's a DVD. Oh, you can get DVDs of it. They cost about £10 for the DVD.
Yeah, yeah. We've actually had a comment here from Carl as well. Thanks for tuning in, by the way, Carl. He says, I'm looking forward to your take on his film, The Frighteners, with Michael J. Fox. Definitely a guilty pleasure and really impressive effects-wise for the time. And I think that is Peter Jackson. You know, he is always trying to push the envelope in terms of, effects, especially today. But let's go back to this film then. So I think the thing that struck me the most with this film, and I do have a soft spot for films like this, is just the practical effects and the gore. That is 100% the selling point of this film. It's how gross, how disgusting, how near the mark can we get, and have some fun with it along the way. And he absolutely does that. There's the from everything. You've got the bit with Peter Jackson's character of Derek, who's this very quirky, strange, oddball character. Like the way he talks and delivers his lines and everything. I guess this is spoiler alert. We're going to be mentioning some things from the film. If you haven't seen it, go and check it out, and then obviously come back to us. There's the scene where he falls off the cliff, and his like brains hanging out of the back of his head, and it looks like actual brains. Like they clearly went to like a butcher's somewhere and just said, "Give me like all like the giblets and everything you've got lying around," and it's gross and it's visceral and that's why I love films like this, and also sort of like just horror films around this time which used real tangible effects. I'm thinking of John Carpenter's The Thing, for example, where you watch that even now and there's so many gross out moments in that film that hold up to this day because it is captured there on camera. So when he's like getting a belt and tying it around his head to keep his brain in, there's guts, there's vomit scenes and everything in this film, and it's all gross. And honestly, the vomit scene did get me. Like, when you can feel your stomach going and it's like you're getting queasy from it. Apparently, it was yogurt and muesli with green food coloring. So, apart from the green food coloring, that kind of sounds like my everyday breakfast, to be honest. Maybe that's going to put me off my breakfast now for all time now that I've seen this film.
Literally, just stick a bit of green food coloring and then you're...
But that is the selling point of the film. That is Peter Jackson. Yeah. He's going for that gross out. He wants to sort of... go for those shocking, gory, excessive moments. And you even see that in his later films. The Lord of the Rings isn't a gore fest, but he loves his decapitations. There's a moment where like orcs are getting ripped apart and everything. And even in the extended cut of Battle of the Five Armies, the Hobbit film, which there's one scene that was added into that film that bumped the certificate from a 12A to a 15. And out of all the Lord of the Rings films, it's the only one that's got a 15 in our rating. And he just goes balls to the wall violent in one scene. And it's so distracting. There's decapitations, there's limbs getting cut off, there's things getting slammed into walls and blood splatter. And of course, it's all done with CGI now with the Hobbit film, but you can see those tendencies there from, going back to these days of the excessive violence and gore.
No, definitely. And it's something that's very of its time, especially with this film, the way they're kind of able to portray that kind of.
I mean, it was 87. To me, this felt like a 70s movie in some points. Yeah. It felt even older than when it was, but
probably in reference to a previous era of what he grew up with, kind of the films that he would have watched when he was kind of learning to filmmaking and stuff like that. But it's both a fun film to watch and a film that I'm probably not going to watch again in a very long time. Just because the terrible acting. Yeah. Unless we do a drink along of it in like a few years' time, which would be an interesting one, should we say. I don't think I could watch this film again sober.
No.
But
I think it would be a fun one for a drink along, actually. I think it does have that, sit your buddies down and just watch like a really dumb, bad movie kind of thing. I think, and I can absolutely see, and that's what all the cult films are like. They always have that charm to them. Interestingly enough, I mean, we haven't seen Meet the Feebles yet. That is coming next week. I'm just going to plug that right now. Obviously, we're going to be talking about this movie for just a little bit longer. We're not. Oh, we've got a Walsh staple saying, "Drink along to this." Maybe in the future, if you guys want to see it, maybe we can absolutely do that. Obviously, Meet the Feebles will be coming next week. That's going to be at the same time, 10 p.m. That's going to be Thursday, 4th of November. At the 2004 Academy Award Oscar speech for The Return of the King, Peter Jackson said he mentioned bad taste along with Meet the Feebles, and he says that it was wisely overlooked by the Academy, which is great. But it's so surreal to me that this is the Peter Jackson. This is where he started off, and you can see some of the relationships and some of the techniques maybe that are used in his later films. There's a lot of close-ups. There's a lot of sort of in-your-face close-ups in this film. I think he actually made his own Steadicam for this as well. Like he sounds like a very hands-on filmmaker, and that's what I really appreciate about him, especially like these earlier films.
Is it quite fun that, very quickly, if you go onto Peter Jackson's IMDb, you know how they always have 4 films listed by the director that you should go and watch. First one is Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring. Second one is Bad Taste.
Nice.
Third one is Return of the King. And then fourth one is Two Towers.
So it gets in. So 3 out of the 4 are the 3 Lord of the Rings films. That's about right.
But it gets in above all of the Hobbit films. It gets in above the Tintin film he did, above King Kong, above They Shall Not Grow Old. This film, Bad Taste, is there.
I can see
number
that.
2.
Yeah.
At number 2, above like the 2 of Lord of the Rings films. Hilarious.
And I do love that about directors, seeing where they start off, a Tarantino, whether it be, Reservoir Dogs, which is fantastic. One of my favorite Tarantino films. Some might even argue it's his best. I don't know. Maybe there's an argument to be had there. As I mentioned, Christopher Nolan, The Following. And now I've finally ticked Bad Taste off the list. We got through it. And as I mentioned, like some of the filmmaking sensibilities there, at least for now, until we get to King Kong, at least maybe, and certainly the Hobbit films. With this film, the location shooting, I love that in the plot they just say that the town's deserted, that the whole town has like disappeared, and that's clearly because go to a secluded place, film it. You haven't got to worry about people or extras or anything like that in the background to contend with. So it's very smart. They definitely filmed within their means. I think in terms of the locations, you've got like the coastal cliffs, and then you've really got that house, which clearly belonged to one of them, probably, or like a family member that they could use on weekends or something.
They destroyed.
Which they just, it's great. I loved it. And, going back to like the close-ups and everything, you can definitely see that in a lot of his earlier films. And even to some degree, The Fellowship of the Ring has a lot of extreme close-ups in that films. Like Gandalf, like, is it secret? Is it safe? And the camera's like right up there in their face, which I think that style of filmmaking, I don't even think he used that really in Two Towers and Return of the King. So Fellowship felt it was that bridge between like his older style to the new, I think. And even collaborations with this film that we, would go on. You've got the voice of Lord Crumb, for example, Peter Veer Jones, who actually passed away in January of this year. did one of the voices of the spiders in Desolation of Smaug. So I love how he can, maintain those relationships throughout his films. The editor, sorry, as well, Jamie Selkirk, this blew my mind, is the editor who won the Academy Award for working on the Lord of the Rings films. The same guy who edited this film edited the Lord of the Rings. So not only is it like the guy who directed, starred in, co-wrote this film, directed Lord of the Rings, the goddamn editor of the Lord of the Rings did this film too. So I think it's great that, he started all these things. Even the production company, Wingnut Films, you see that at the beginning of Lord of the Rings too. So it's very humble beginnings. Did you have a favorite scene from this film, or like a favorite moment at all?
My favorite moment was bit of spoilers here, but when Peter Jackson literally chainsaws his way into the house and he just walks in the cutout of himself. I thought that was a hilarious shot. I really liked that. I just think that is just leaning into that kind of, we know the film is bad kind of vibe, but it's fantastic. I just absolutely love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of the practical stuff, and even like the chainsaw wielding things, Texas Chainsaw Massacre vibes a lot of the time, I think. Certainly Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. And I know that a lot of the effects were inspired by, what's his name? Savini. Tom Savini, I think it is. He worked on a lot of the zombie films, the Romero films, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, things like that. And I think Creepshow, I think he actually worked on one of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre films. I don't know if it was the first one. It's probably the second one. Having seen the first two Texas Chainsaw Massacre films, certainly in terms of tone, I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 is definitely more in line with this one. But my favorite scene kind of comes pretty much directly at the end of the film. There are some great moments throughout the film, in terms of gore and spectacle, everything like that. But I love the bit where Peter Jackson's character sort of like headfirst dives with a chainsaw into Lord Crumb's head and just like burrows through his head, his entire body, and then comes out the bottom of him. And then you have that great line, which is probably one of the most defining lines, like, "I'm born again." Where's the skin suit? I'm just spoiling this whole movie right now. This is the end of the film. Where's the skin suit? And he's like, "I'm coming to get you, bastards." It's just, a perfect ending for the film. I think people are still clamoring for a sequel. I think there's a lot of, like Peter Jackson, when are you going to go back to this style of filmmaking? And that's kind of my next question. Would you, knowing where Peter Jackson's gone now, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, King Kong, the Hobbit films, and I don't know if he's got a next feature film lined up. I think The Hobbit took it out of him, to be honest, which I don't blame him for.
He's been announced as a producer on another Tintin film, and he's doing the Untitled third Tintin film, so he's got 2 coming out.
And I think he's probably an executive producer on the new Amazon Lord of the Rings show, but I'm not sure about that entirely. But I genuinely think he's been massively burned out by the Hobbit films, with everything that he had to do on that. And as I said, a review for another time on those. So it sounds like he's just kind of like taking a back seat a little bit, working on these documentary films, passion projects again. He's kind of going back to the things, the World War. Yep.
Dare I say, that might be because the last thing that he properly produced and wrote, didn't direct, but it was Mortal Engines, which
I still haven't watched that film, but I remember, the trailers where it's, from the makers of Lord of the Rings and King Kong, and it's like, well, he's not directing it though, is he? Like, let's be fair. No. I think it was Weta Digital doing the effects on that, I think, and he probably had some say in it. And I know he did a lot of marketing for the film, but it wasn't his film. I think it was like when Alita Battle Angel came out. Do you remember that? And like James Cameron was all over the marketing for it.
Yeah.
And it's not his film. It's not a James Cameron film, but he was in all the interviews for it.
But then it's one of those where, because you're like, oh, no, I'm the producer, nothing to do with me. You can just step away. You can just go, look, my name was marketed all over the advertising, but I have nothing really to do with it. So,
And yeah, and I'm trying to think of some other things from this film too. I mean, you've got the cardboard cutouts of the Beatles in there as well, which is very contemporary because obviously he's got his huge like 6-hour epic Beatles documentary coming out later this year, which I'll probably still watch just for completion's sake. I'm sorry to offend everyone, but I'm not the biggest Beatles fan in the world, and 6 hours is quite excessive for any documentary, especially when you're not too hot on the band. But I'd like to see what Peter Jackson does with it and what he's done with the archival footage. But I would quite like to see Peter Jackson go back to something like this, and I don't know if he ever will now. I think he's advanced so much as a filmmaker now. I
Yeah.
think he loves his CGI. I think he loves his effects, and for better or worse, you can do some incredible things with it. But I would love, give him $1 million budget and let's see what film he can make with it, which they never would do. But I would love to
No.
see him go back to something like this, just to like capture that sense of humor that
Or
he had with
would he
these
turn
films.
around and go, "No, if we're doing this again, I'm going low budget. Don't give me a budget. I'll do it." Would he do that?
I'd love to see it, like even if it was just an experiment, even if it was a short film, anything. I would love to see it. Just for him to make it and just to see him go back to his roots a little
Would
bit.
you want him acting in it again if he was to do a
No,
sequel?
no. I love Peter Jackson to death, but a fine actor he does not make, and that would probably be by his
Chris,
own admission.
doesn't that add to the charm of it?
It does. No, it does. It absolutely, with this film especially. And we know that he loves to cameo in his films. I think he's cameoed in all of his films,
Pretty much all of his films, yeah.
Battle of the Five Armies, and I'm not sure. Was he in Lovely Bones? I think he was in Lovely Bones.
Yeah. He was in Battle of the Five Armies. Oh, he was a picture in Battle of the Five Armies.
I don't really count that one, to be fair.
I mean, hell, he's cameoed in Hot Fuzz and films like that.
He has, so. Yeah, he's been in a lot of stuff. So, I mean, I always look forward to seeing his cameos, and even, obviously he's in the 3 Lord of the Rings films along the way, and 2 of the 3 Hobbit films, but there's a scene, it's the one scene that I don't care for in Return of the King Extended Edition, which is the scene with Peter Jackson acting in there. So it's like Quentin Tarantino, I love Tarantino. That bit in Django Unchained where he's playing the Australian, I hate it. I skip it every time. I can't stand it, Tate. It's like some directors just shouldn't act in their films. I know they want to put their own stamp on it. I know they want to be a piece of the the history of that film, but some directors' job is best behind the camera and not in front of it, I think. Is there anything else you wanted to mention from this film, or I guess if not, we can move on to final thoughts on this?
I think we move on to final thoughts and then socials, I reckon.
Yeah. So final thoughts for me. I'm glad that I've seen this film. I echo your thoughts. I don't know when I'll be watching this film again. Maybe we will get round to a drink along at some day.
Should we say if we get a certain amount of likes or comments, I reckon.
Is this going to be our new Cats thing where we promised that we would film the entirety of Cats if we hit, I think it was 2K subscribers at the time, wasn't it? I think. Or was it 3K?
Before the end of the year. And
which we didn't. I mean, we have that now, but the promise was before the end of the year. We didn't hit that number before the end of the year. So
should we say 3,000 subscribers by the end of the year? We'll watch Bad Taste and do a drink along.
We'll do a drink along. I think that's fair. Yeah, if we hit 3K, I mean, we got a long way to go, so that's a lot of subscribers.
So
I mean, maybe this will make it viral. Who knows? And then we're going to be eating our words then, and we're going to have to get that alcohol out.
Hell, I'll watch it again and do a drink along.
I think it would be fun. And oh no, that's probably not a good combination. Actually, not with alcohol. I was going to say. Instead, should we have like a bowl of green muesli-filled yogurt?
Actually, to be fair, if we get to 3K subscribers by the end of the year, I reckon we should do that.
You've got to down a whole bowl.
No, it's an eat along.
No, what you'd have to do is you'd have to take a shot or take a drink for the drink along, and also take a spoonful of green food coloring yogurt at the same time. That cannot end well. It's not going to end well.
It's a tall. Okay, we'll make it easier. For the drink along alone, it's 2,500. If you want 2,500. If not, then Walsh Staples, you will have to just tell your friends about our channel, which you can do through various different means. You can just go and find us on Facebook. You can go onto Twitter. You can go onto Letterboxd. You can, of course, get a TeePublic link in the description. But of course, subscribing, commenting, telling us your thoughts, any feedback at all is always the best way of kind of getting to us and stuff like that.
Absolutely,
and smooth transition there. If I
that was a very smooth transition. We didn't get your final thoughts though, Tate. So I'm going to kind of pepper it.
I was going to say my final thoughts in this film are that I'm not going to return to this unless it is a drink along.
Yeah,
I feel like I need to be drunk, possibly going into it as well to understand it. But honestly, it was a fun experience to watch. Humble origins. It's always fun to see, like, even with like actors who suddenly make it famous, you're like, oh, they were this kind of untitled cameo in this TV show, this film back in the day, and it's like, no way, let's see how far they've come and stuff like that. So no, I thought it was fun. But yeah, very, very far cry from what we'll get in about 10 years'
absolutely.
time, film-wise.
And we've had a comment from Carl as well. I'm just going to bring that up right now. He says, outside of The Lord of the Rings, I'd have to say The Lovely Bones is my favorite of his. That is a bold statement. I've only seen it once. I thought people were mostly lukewarm on that film, but it's good. It's great to see that, The Lovely Bones has got.
As much as I love Saoirse Ronan, I still haven't seen that film.
Haven't you? Oh, okay.
No,
That could be
my
interesting.
favorite outside of Lord of the Rings, and possibly, and this is sacrilege to say against you, Chris, but I prefer They Shall Not Grow Old. Just on rewatch, because that film gave me just a different perspective
it's a great
in life.
film.
Just a very different perspective on what life was like back then. And I'm really into that kind of area of history. So that was like a different experience, shall we say?
I'll never forget watching that for the first time when it switches from black and white to the color, and like, oh my god, that was
it's a different
so
feeling,
immersive.
isn't it? I know Lord of the Rings, it gets feelings kind of going for me and stuff like that. I enjoy watching Lord of the Rings, and I know you do on repeat, but there was something very different about something that I've never felt with a film before, with They Shall Not Grow Old.
It's quite surreal, wasn't it? I think at the time.
I've got the DVD.
Not to make this. Oh, have you? Yeah, no.
I got the DVD down here with me for just. I rarely would buy a documentary film DVD. I think March of the Penguins is the only other one in the house we have. Maybe We Should Be Kings as well. But there it is.
See it. Oh, awesome.
Very, very good.
It was great. I would love to watch it again. I only watched it the once, I think, I think it was on TV, wasn't it? I think it was.
Yeah, they showed it on BBC. TV. They said, Peter Jackson said, I want it to be a readily made available resource. I still believe it is on BBC iPlayer. Anyone can access it at any time because it's a learning resource now.
I think it missed out, didn't it? I think they didn't submit it in time, wasn't it, or something with
the Academy Awards for documentary. It would have won easily.
It would, absolutely. And
that was the year. I was going to say that was the year that one of the best documentaries of the last 10 years came out. That was Free Solo year.
Yeah.
And it would have easily won against Free Solo, which is insane.
I don't know if they have or not, but I know there were talks of screening it in schools and everything during history class, which I think
they do that. They actually, it's kind of taught as part of curriculum and stuff like that.
I would love to see him do more stuff like that. I know we're kind of getting away from the review and we're kind of talking about the history of things, but I actually don't think we'll be covering They Shall Not Grow Old as part of this filmography retrospective, because we do already have a review on it. So, during the time when we get to that, we'll probably just relink that. But if you haven't seen our review on it, do go and check it out. It was really good to talk about that documentary. I'd love to see him take on more archival footage like that and sort of rejuvenate it, give it some color. I think they added frames in, didn't they, as well, to kind of smooth it out. From the very stuttery, the very bare bones.
I'm guessing that's what he's kind of doing with the archival footage from the Beatles stuff into his next project. So
we'll get ready to buy that on DVD. I think that'll probably be like the Lord of the Rings, where it folds out and it folds out and it folds out, and then you've got like twice the length of the behind the scenes as well on the making of it, maybe. But my final thoughts on this film: go and watch it. It's a fun film. It's not great, and it's intentionally not great, but it was clearly a passion project. He worked on it for 4 years. Some great practical effects in there. I love the scene where he falls off the cliff. Actually, I did want to mention that. Do you think there were any safety precautions during that? Because this just seems like a bunch of mates just grabbing a camera and going.
I was like, throw dummy off the cliff, I reckon.
He was like clinging up. There was a fight scene on the edge of it. I thought, could you imagine filming this? Like, it's terrifying, but where he fights himself, and through everything he fights himself, which was very clever. Love the scenes like that, and the gore's completely excessive and fun. It's a fun movie, but it's not a great movie. I wouldn't even go so far as to say it's a good movie. I can understand why it's got its favorites, and it's got me more curious, probably more so than this film. This film was fine. It was fun for what it was, but I'm really looking forward to seeing his next films and seeing how he develops, across all of his films, which again, I'm going to reaffirm it for next week. This is one that I'm really looking forward to seeing. Meet the Feebles review. Again, that's 10 p.m. next Thursday, the 4th of November. Expect, another Peter Jackson review every single Thursday in the lead up to December, which, of course, is Lord of the Rings month. You guys know what that is. This is like the Muppets on cocaine, literally on cocaine. There's sex, there's violence. It was the Team America of its day, probably back then. It's going to be absolutely absurd and ridiculous, and I can't wait for it. I hope it delivers. But yeah, that'll do it for our review on Bad Taste. So thank you once again to everyone that's tuned on, that's watched, that's commented. And you know, if you haven't seen Bad Taste, you've still got a week to watch it and also catch up with Meet the Feebles for next week. So we'll see you again, same time next week. And until then, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.